Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Daniel Anstandig with LDR Interactive. It's nice to see you today. I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce you to how LDR works with radio stations to drive ratings, revenue, and web traffic using interactive technology with audiences. You may know us as listener-driven radio. Our company started about 5 years ago. We're based in Cleveland, Ohio, and Dallas, Texas. We have 22 people in our company, all with backgrounds in broadcast programming, engineering, or software engineering. And we create interactive voting windows that radio stations use to drive listening and to drive audience through their sites and mobile apps. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing over the last year and working with our partners around the world. We work with over 300 radio stations and networks around the world in markets large and small. We work with a lot of country radio stations and have had tremendous success from a ratings standpoint, revenue standpoint, and web traffic growth standpoint. So over the last year, we've created new mobile apps that we call Groover that engage your audience at an all-new level beyond just streaming to your audience through the mobile app. With LDR's Groover mobile apps, they're white-labeled for your radio station, and listeners can vote on which songs will play next on the air. They can choose which songs play more or less. They can get alerts by email, text, or tweet whenever their favorite songs are about to play. And we also designed a new feature called Open Mic, where a listener can record 10 seconds of their own voice and send it to the radio station studio. And then they can also get an alert by email, text, or tweet when their voice is about to play on the air, and ultimately go share it with their friends on Facebook and Twitter before they go on the air too. We've seen tremendous success with this app. It's rolled out across a number of country radio stations, including 93Q in Houston, arguably one of the largest country radio stations in the world. The app also has a number of other interesting features, a special alarm clock that wakes you up with a personal greeting. It ties into your station's automation system, so it shows you which songs have recently been played, what's playing now, what's coming up, and even who your friends are who like the artists that you like too. And all of our features are, again, white-labeled, so they're branded for your radio station. Now, recently, we also started doing something kind of interesting outside the interactive music space, and this ties into the subject matter of today's panel. We created a system called Topic Pulse about a year ago that scans Facebook, Twitter, message boards, comment boards, and minute by minute, it tells you which topics are trending up or trending down on social media in your market. So Topic Pulse is on the air now in 50 markets. And if you were to review the amount of data that Topic Pulse does per minute, you would need around 15,000 interns. We've actually done the nerdy math to figure out that you would need 15,000 interns or the entire student body of Syracuse University to process the amount of information, tweets, posts, message board comments, etc., that Topic Pulse does in an average minute. So it gives you a quick minute-by-minute view of what's trending up, what's hot, what's new, what's trending down. And in addition to that, we can also show you which demos each topic is most appealing to. So you can see this minute what's trending and whether it's really appealing to your target audience, male, female, 18, 34, 35 plus. And also you can get more information on who's actually sharing anything on social media in your market, as well as news sources, images, and videos that are trending along with that topic. And we've built a number of systems for newsrooms and for morning shows alike. We work with a number of morning shows that use this system to see what's happening in real time in their market. One thing that we're seeing with social media that I'm sure you're experiencing too is that I think we all grew up in a 24-hour news cycle culture. And now with social media, that news cycle is really 4 to 6 hours. It's very rare that a topic lasts beyond one day part, unless that topic has really evolved and there's something brand new about it. Things move too fast in our world today. And so if you're doing show prep the night before your show, well, first of all, God bless you. That's great. But in most cases, the prep that you've done the night before is already old news in the morning. And so we really built Topic Pulse to keep a real-time view on what's happening with your audience in your market on social media. We'd love to get to know you. A number of us are here at CRS. We're huge supporters of CRS and glad to be a part of the event. And you can find more information about us, too, at ldrinteractive.com. Thank you very much.
All right, and now we will get on with the program. Please welcome Nielsen Audio's Gary Mayo.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank CRS for inviting me to speak and also LDR for sponsoring today's session. I'm going to talk about loyal country radio format listeners and what they look like, what they do in terms of their media interactions with a focus on technology and how they use technology. My name is Gary Mayo, as you know. I need to update my headshot, but this is the first time I've come to this conference, and I'm really amazed at the beautiful, wonderful gifts that you get that get brought right to your room. And like, did everyone get that little bag last night with the little iced teas in it? Well, this morning I woke up really thirsty, and I thought they were iced teas. And so if there's issues, we'll blame it on that. For those of you that are not familiar with, I work for Scarborough Research, which is now a wholly owned subsidiary of the Nielsen Company. And in a couple of weeks, we will be absorbed completely into the Nielsen brand. But for those of you that are not familiar with us, we're a local market consumer survey of consumer behavior and media usage. And we've been doing this for about 40 years, and we measure 123 local markets around the country. We interview over 200,000 adults age 18 plus each year via a telephone interview and a mailed questionnaire and/or internet questionnaire. We're the only local qualitative data source that is audited and accredited by the Media Rating Council, and we're the primary qualitative service in the radio industry. We measure 2,000 categories and brands, and we have partnered with GfK MRI for attitudinal insights, and I will be using some of those attitudinal insights in this presentation this morning. So what we're going to cover is we're going to look at the loyal country radio listener in terms of their generational makeup. And we like to look at generations because that takes into account things like life stage, whether there are kids at home, whether they're young and starting out, or whether they're older adults that are coming toward the end of their careers. And that really drives what they do in terms of consumer behavior and particularly media usage. And we've talked a lot about millennials at this conference, and I'm going to spend a lot of time, too, talking about millennials. And I think what you'll find is much of what I'm going to show you is either going to corroborate or support what you've already heard from my colleague from Nielsen Audio yesterday in his presentation, and also what the Edison people have been saying. Then we're going to look at behavior, particularly as it relates to technology, specifically mobile technology and social media. And then we'll end with some attitudes and lifestyle information. So the key takeaways from this presentation are these points. The loyal country radio listener is a huge audience. It's 33 million adults, as we have defined it, or 35% of all loyal radio listeners. And let me just point out that we interview adults age 18 plus, and Bill Rose, my colleague yesterday, when he was talking about adults 12 plus. So these numbers aren't going to exactly jive because we don't measure adults under the age of 18. The loyal country radio listening audience is a very young audience. 67% are between the ages of 18 and 49. The Gen X folks are the largest group of folks at 14 million, but millennials is really driving the growth in the format. They're above average users of the internet and mobile devices, and they listen to radio online. And their usage of internet is somewhat specific by device, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Social networking is huge across all of these generations, but primarily with the millennials, which I'm sure is no surprise. And there are opportunities to engage these folks through social media. They use the internet to buy and shop, and Gen Xers are the big spenders online, but they all use the internet for shopping in large percentages. And despite generational differences, common themes emerge in terms of their attitudes towards family, finances, culture, tradition, the environment, et cetera. And that information you might find helpful in your programming decisions. But before we get into the country radio listeners specifically, let's just look at some general technology trends that we've been seeing over the last few years. And I think that they basically fall into two categories. One is technology that allows people to be mobile. And secondly, technology that allows people to avoid commercials. And I think those two trends are shaping a lot of what's going on in terms of media usage. So for example, on this slide, the first big number is the growth in the ownership of smartphones. This is comparing 2008 data to 2013 data, and you can see there's been a 469% increase in the ownership of smartphones. In our latest data, 51% of adults owned a smartphone. When our new data comes out in a couple of days, I'm sure that number is going to be bigger. And also, we started measuring tablets a few years ago. We didn't measure them in 2008 because they weren't around. But you can see now tablet ownership is at 28%, e-reader ownership is at 15%. I also wanted to point out that growth in satellite radio over those last 5 years at 34%. That's an example of, I think, people using technology to avoid commercials. In terms of television, I mean, much of what people are doing are buying technology that enhances the viewing experience. You see the 158% increase in high-def television, and also Blu-ray disc players. You know, when we get new numbers on that, I'm sure they're going to be quite a bit bigger. But look at the growth of video digital recorders at 40%, still another form of technology to help people avoid commercials. And in terms of internet access, we could see that it's grown from 67% to 80% over the past 5 years. That's a 23% increase. But in terms of what people are doing online, look at these gigantic numbers for listening to the radio, TV, watching or downloading television programs, or watching or downloading movies. So you could see that, you know, that's a testament to the success of Hulu and Netflix, but also the internet radio, the digital radio options that are out there for people. And in terms of kind of legacy media, like TV, newspapers, and regular radio and their websites, what we've noticed is that you know, radio stations were kind of late coming to the website game. Newspapers really pioneered that. But if you look at the audience growth, it's really been flat, more or less, for television and newspaper websites. But visitation to any radio website has grown 19%. So that's good news for the radio industry. All right, so that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to focus on, which is basically the loyal country radio listener. And this is how we defined the loyal country radio listener. We basically looked at loyal radio listeners based on a quintile analysis. I'm happy to talk to you about what a quintile analysis is offline after a couple of those iced teas. But suffice it to say that we've taken the top 2 quintiles of radio listeners, the people who listen to the most radio. And then we connected that to people who listen to the country radio formats, classic country, country, and new country formats. And what we found is that 35% of the loyal radio listener pie are loyal country listeners. So if you look at that pie as being a loyal, 100% of the loyal radio listeners, 35% of them listen to the country formats. Now, when we break it down by generation, you could see that the millennials, they comprise 21% of the loyal radio audience, but 25% of the loyal country audience. That means that they index higher for being country radio listeners. They're more concentrated in that group of country radio listeners. So this corroborates what we've heard yesterday, that the millennials are really driving the growth in the format. Gen X, they comprise 42% of loyal radio listeners and 42% of country. They're right at the average. Boomers are a little bit below the market average, and the greatest generation is 2% below the market average. So basically, we're talking about an audience of 33 million adults, and 67% of those folks are between the ages of 18 and 49. So that's a good news story. It's a young audience, and it's also the kind of audience that advertisers covet. For the rest of this analysis, we have excluded the greatest generation. We love the greatest generation, and they're great, but they're kind of small, and they don't listen to a ton of radio, so we're excluding them from this analysis. If we look at these folks in terms of their demographics, and again, remember, our base are adults who are loyal radio listeners that listen to the country format. Millennials are between the ages of 18 and 29. They represent 8.3 million of the 33 million. They tend to be women. 55% are women, so they skew somewhat female. 73% are not married. 68% are not a parent, meaning they don't have a child under the age of 18 at home. So just like you would expect a profile from a millennial, they tend to be single, childless. But 54% have a college education, 72% are employed full or part-time, and 49% have household incomes of 50,000 or more. So they're a highly educated, well-employed, high-income group of folks. Generation X makes up the largest group at 14 million. They're between the ages of 30 and 49. They're about at the market average in terms of gender. 34% are not married, so a lot of them, more of them are married. That's a life stage issue, obviously. And 68% of them are parents. 60% have college educations, 79% are employed, 62% have household incomes of 50,000 or more. So again, a very nice, attractive group for advertisers. The baby boomers are the second biggest group at 9.6 million. They're more likely to be male. 35% are not married, so they're more likely to be married, obviously. 87% are not a parent, probably because they've had their children and they've grown and left the household. 54% college educated, 63% employed, and 57% have household incomes of 50,000 or more. Where are these folks, where are they in terms of the country? And you can see that they kind of cluster around the east, north central, south Atlantic, and east, south central markets around the country, with that Green Bay Appleton being an outlier, so shout out to the country stations up in Green Bay Appleton. In terms of the millennials, this is where they cluster, pretty much looks the same, with that little outlier up there in Grand Rapids. This is for the Gen Xers, again, pretty much looks the same with an outlier up there in Syracuse. And this is for the boomers. So pretty much looks the same with those outliers in Green Bay and Buffalo. So if you cluster them all together, it sort of makes sense that they are concentrated, if you will, in these markets. Okay, now we looked at the other formats that these folks listen to, again, by generation. So our base is folks who are loyal radio listeners who listen to country radio formats. For the millennials, these percentages are reach numbers. So millennials, 67% of the millennial group are reached by the pop contemporary hit format. But you can see that country is the second format at 42%, and you can see the other formats that they listen to. Generation X, the country format, is number 3 behind pop contemporary hits and adult contemporary. And for baby boomers, it's number 4 behind news talk, adult contemporary, and classic hits. All right, so now let's look at what these folks do online. So 97% of the millennials have access to the internet in the past 30 days. 92% of Gen X, 80% of boomers. And by the way, what you're going to see, the pattern basically, is that in terms of technology, the millennials are the most engaged. Gen X is, sometimes they look like millennials, sometimes they look more like boomers, but for the most part, they're kind of in the middle, and the boomers are the least engaged in technology. But even at 80%, they're not exactly unengaged, they're just not engaged at the same level as their younger cohorts. So 97% of the millennials are online. 47% of millennials spend 10 or more hours in an average week online. 42% of Gen X spend 10 or more hours. 33% of boomers. So these folks are spending a lot of time online, even the boomers. And in terms of their attitudes about the internet, large percentages agree with these following statements, regardless of their generation. So going online is one of my favorite things to do with my free time. 65% for millennials, 55% for Gen X, 43% for baby boomers. So this shows the importance of the internet in terms of as being an entertainment provider, if you will, for these groups. The internet is a main source of entertainment for me, 65% for the millennials versus 49% for Gen X and 34% for boomers. And I would feel disconnected without the internet. 65% of millennials agree with that statement. 56% for Gen X, 43% for boomers. So it's very clear that the internet is a main source of entertainment, particularly for the younger cohorts. Now, in terms of the devices that they own, and this is, I'm sure, is no surprise to anybody, that the millennials are more likely to own and use mobile devices versus their older cohorts. So, for example, I think it was one of the Edison folks said yesterday that their cell phone or their smartphone is their living room. It's their entertainment center, and this data certainly bears that out. So you could see that the smallest percentage for owning a desktop is among the millennials, and the highest is among the boomers. But in terms of owning a laptop, which is a more mobile device, obviously, 72% of millennials do, 66% of Gen X, and 49% of boomers. If we look at smartphones, 65% of the millennials own a smartphone versus 55% for Gen X and 30% for boomers. The smartphone is clearly their device of choice. So in order to provide entertainment to these folks, you need to have a smartphone presence. It's that simple. And tablets, it's a little bit of a mixed bag because tablets, for the most part, are still kind of expensive. So it's 24% for the millennials, 27% for Gen X, 18% for baby boomers. When our new data comes out in a couple of days, tablet ownership is obviously going to grow for all three groups. All right, now we're looking at the blue bars are just for online adults, for ownership of tablets and smartphones. These are loyal country radio listeners, loyal radio listeners that are online, not the country ones, just loyal radio listeners. And you can see the growth in tablet ownership from 14 to 32%, and the growth in smartphones, this is just 2013 over 2012, from 44% to 58%. But now if we look at loyal country radio listeners that are online, they're just about the same in terms of the tablet, but they're much more likely to own smartphones. And again, this is being driven by the fact that millennials are driving the growth in the country music format. Now, these folks listen to radio online. These are folks who have used the internet to listen to either a local station streaming online, a terrestrial station that's streaming online, or an internet-only radio station. 36% of millennials do that, 30% of Gen X do that, 20% of boomers do that. Now, if we look at it by device, we could see that 60% of millennials are doing this on a computer, 59%, just about the same percentage for Gen X is doing it on a computer. Baby boomers overwhelmingly are doing this on their computer. They're more wed to their desktop or laptop computers than they are to their mobile devices. But if you look at smartphones, you can see that the millennials, 55% of these millennials are listening to radio on their smartphones, 51% for Gen X and only 27% for boomers. And for tablets, again, because they're not as established as a smartphone, 12% for millennials, 15% for Gen X, and 12% for boomers. So again, kind of driving home the fact that the smartphone is the living room, if you will, for the millennials. Now, what we've done here is we've ranked the top 10 internet behaviors. This is what folks do online. And the dark purple bars they're doing it on their smartphone, and the light purple bars they're doing it on their computer. So you could see that 5 out of the 10 top activities online for millennials are done on their smartphone. Again, driving home the fact that their smartphone is their device of choice. A tablet did not show up in the top 10, but in terms of their number one activity on a tablet, it's social networking at 17%. If we look at the same chart for Gen X, you can see that only 3 of their top 10 activities are done on a smartphone. Most of what they're doing is still done on a computer. And the tablet didn't show up in the top 10, but if you looked at the tablet, social networking is their number one activity at 16%. And for the boomers, none of their top 10 activities are done on anything but a computer. But if we look at the smartphone, their number one activity is checking the weather. And if we look at the tablet, their number one activity is social networking. So again, the millennials are wed to their smartphones. In terms of tablet usage, the number one use is social networking for all 3 generations. So what sites are these folks going to? In terms of millennials, 95% of millennial online loyal country listeners are engaging in social media. They have gone to a social media site in the past 30 days. The number one site, of course, is Facebook at 84%. YouTube is second at 64%, and Pinterest at 25%. They spend an average of 1 hour and 26 minutes per day on social networking sites. That's 23 minutes more than the average for loyal country radio listeners. So they're very much engaged in social media. They spend a lot of time doing it. They don't answer their emails until 4 o'clock because they're on social media. That was a reference to the presentation that just came before. In terms of Gen X, Facebook, number one, YouTube, number two, as you might expect. LinkedIn up a little higher because these folks are older and they're further along in their careers, and LinkedIn is a career-based social networking site. They spend an average of 1 hour and 3 minutes per day on social networking sites, and that's about the same as the average for loyal country radio listeners who are online overall. And boomers, Facebook number one, YouTube number two, LinkedIn number three. Again, because they're older and LinkedIn is more of a career site. They spend 41 minutes per day. That's 22 minutes less than the average. So social networking, obviously, extremely important, particularly for millennials and Gen Xers. Now, what I want to show on this slide is these are activities that these folks have done online on social networking sites, specifically, in the past 30 days. So 19% of millennials said they follow or become a fan of something or someone. 19% have done this in the past 30 days. 7% said they have clicked on an advertisement, and 6% rated or reviewed a product or service. Right now, these are all behaviors that show how they interact with a brand, say, for example. But if we ask about their attitudes about social networking sites, we see a gap. So, for example, what these other points are showing are the reasons why these folks think it's important to visit a social networking site. So, in other words, 26% of millennials say that they go to social networking sites because they think it's important to show support for their favorite companies or brands. 18% say they go to gain access to VIP or members-only events, and 16% go to rate or review a product or service. They think that's important. So if you look back on the bar on the left, you can see 6% of the millennials actually rated or reviewed a product or service, but 16% think it's an important reason for going to social networking sites. So what that tells me is that there are opportunities to engage with these folks. They are willing to do this behavior if you provide them a compelling, relevant reason to do so. So if you want to engage with them on social media, and one way to engage with them is having them rate or review a product or service, then there's definitely headroom there because they think it's important, but they're not doing it as much as they think it's important. The same pattern is true for Gen Xers. So you can see that 14% think it's important to rate or review a product or service, but only 4% have actually done it. And same pattern for baby boomers, though all of the percentages are much lower because they just don't engage in social media to the same degree as their younger cohorts. This is looking at all of the online country radio listeners, regardless of generation. And more than 8 out of 10 agree with the statement that the internet has allowed me to learn things I probably wouldn't have learned otherwise. So that means that the other 2 already knew everything. More than 8 out of 10 agree with the internet is a great way to gather information on products and services I'm considering purchasing. And more than 7 out of 10 agree with the statement that the internet is a great way to actually buy products. So they're using the internet as a source of entertainment, but they're also using the internet in a transactional way to buy products, to research products, to learn about products. So let's look at internet shopping in a little more detail. So 76% of millennials made a purchase online in the past 12 months, 78% for Gen X, 74% for baby boomers. So pretty much the same across the 3 generations. If we look at spending, we could see that Gen X are the big spenders on average. They, in an average 12 months, they spend about $850 online versus $700 for millennials and $800 for baby boomers. So the Gen Xers basically generate about $8.5 billion in sales because they're the biggest group in terms of numbers, and they spend the most on average. And in terms of seeking out information about technology, loyal country radio listeners agree with these statements. And again, this is for all of them, not just this is for all the country radio listeners, not the generations. Before buying electronics, I do as much research as possible. 64% agree with that statement. I enjoy learning about technology or electronic products from others. 57% agree with that statement. I like to read reviews before buying technology or electronics. 60% agree with that statement. And I often ask the advice of others when it comes to technology or electronic products. 64% agree with that statement. So these folks tend to be influencers and brand loyal people in terms of their, the electronics and brands that they like to buy. More than 8 out of 10 agree with the statement, when I find a brand I like, I stick to it. So they're brand loyal. More than half agree, I'm willing to pay more for top quality electronics. So quality is important. And nearly 3/4 agree with the statement, if a product is made by a company I trust, I'll buy it even if it is slightly more expensive. So issues of trust, issues of brands, issue of quality are important to these folks. And they love their gadgets, and they influence other people in terms of their purchases of electronic products. So 62% agree with the statement, technology helps make my life more organized. 58% are fascinated by new technology. And 60% say, when I find a technology or electronics product I like, I typically recommend it to people I know. So this is where word of mouth becomes very important. And social media is just a big electronic version of word of mouth. All right, so now we're going to just shift gears and talk a little bit about the attitudes that are held by loyal country radio listeners. What kinds of things are they interested in? What are they talking about? And hopefully some of this could help inform your programming decisions. They want more family time. They agree with the statement that spending time with my family is my top priority. All 3 generations above 80%, close to 90% for the Xers and boomers. I frequently wish I had more time to spend with my family. Again, all hovering around 80%. They're very much focused on their finances. All 3 generations agree with the following statements. Investing for the future is very important to me. Again, hovering around 80%. I hate to borrow money. Again, all 3 generations hovering around 80%. And the economy has a direct effect on my spending habits. Much higher percentage for boomers than for millennials, which I found interesting because I think millennials spend their parents' money regardless of what the shape of the economy is. They want to be healthier. They care about health and they care about fitness. So large percentages, again around high 70s, vitamin supplements improve one's health. In the 50s, in general, I think herbal supplements are effective. I go to the doctor regularly for checkups, obviously much higher for the boomers, but still high percentages for all 3 generations. And I'm always looking for new ways to live a healthier life. So they're interested in health, they're interested in fitness, they're interested in nutrition. They are culturally and traditionally oriented. Large percentages of all 3 groups agree with the statements, I enjoy maintaining traditions, I like to learn about foreign cultures, and my cultural ethnic tradition is an important part of who I am. And that's, you have to remember, because we learned in some of the presentations yesterday, that the millennials are the most ethnically diverse generation that we've had. And so culture, tradition, learning about other cultures, very important to these group of folks. I think it was the Edison people who pointed out the phrase, do good. And what we found is that loyal country radio listeners support causes they believe in, and they like to do good. In terms of doing volunteer work, 29% of millennials said they did that in the past year, 30% of Gen X, 28% of boomers. They donated to a charitable organization, high percentages, 61% for millennials, 67% for Xers, 74% for boomers. And they consider themselves to be spiritual. So 62% of millennials said, I consider myself to be a spiritual person. 70% of Gen X, 73% of boomers. So it's important that that do-good concept really does make sense when you're talking about loyal country radio listeners. They care about the environment. Large percentages agree with the statement that the government should pay more attention to environmental issues. I am interested in finding out how I can help the environment, all in the 60s, and global warming is a serious threat, in the 60s. So these folks all agree that the environment is important, and they're interested in how they can help. And finally, just like most people, they just want to have fun. And I think yesterday in the Edison presentation, when they were showing the millennials talking about words that they associate with country music, one of the big ones was fun. Remember fun and summertime and all that? So large percentages say that they seek out variety in their everyday lives. Large percentages say my philosophy in life should be have as much fun as you can. And I consider myself to be very sociable. Again, large percentages across all three generations. So the whole idea of fun, having variety in their lives, following a fun life philosophy, very important to loyal country radio listeners. So I think that, so that was my last data slide. So just kind of to reiterate the key takeaways, the loyal country radio listening audience is huge, 35 million adults, 35% of all loyal radio listeners. They're a very young audience, 67% are between the ages of 18 and 49, concentrated among millennials and Gen Xers. They're above average users of the internet and mobile devices, way above average for mobile devices. They listen to radio online, and they use their devices for certain kinds of tasks, but the millennials clearly are using their mobile devices for more tasks than their older cohorts. Social networking is used with all three groups, especially among millennials, and there's opportunities for you to engage with millennials through social media. They use the internet to shop and buy, and Gen Xers are the big spenders online. And despite generational differences, they have common themes around family, finances, doing good, culture, tradition, and the environment. So that is the end of my spiel. I know there were a lot of numbers up there, and hopefully, I know most of you memorized them. But for those of you that didn't, this presentation will be made available. And we have some time left, so does anybody have any questions?
Question about household income, millennials, you said 49% income. Is that a household headed by a millennial or a house they happen to live in?
It's a house they happen to live in. Right, they don't have to be the head of the household. We interview adults that live within the household, and so they could be the head of the household or just living with their folks.
Did you notice any difference geographically, or was it pretty homogeneous all across areas such as the country, as far as differences in any category?
Well, there's always local market differences. So everything we looked at was national data. I showed those maps to show kind of where folks were concentrated, but certainly markets have their own nuances. And we didn't look at those local market differences, but if we did look at local markets, I'm sure there would be differences just based on the fact that local markets have their own differences and nuances. Yeah, nothing, we didn't look at it, so nothing, but certainly we could look at it. Other questions?
Yeah, when you showed the social networking that they use, was Instagram an option, or did anybody answer Instagram?
I don't think, in that particular survey, I don't think Instagram was an option. We have data coming out, brand new data coming out this week. Actually, I was hoping it would come out in time for me to show you all the new data, but my guess is that we've measured Instagram plus a whole bunch of other sites that have emerged since like 2012, and I'm sure it's going to be there in significant numbers. All right, well, thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.